Hello. So, this is Irreversible Damage Chapter 1. There's no cool subtitle to Chapter 1 this time. It's just simply called The Girls. We're just going to jump right into it. This chapter starts out with Abigail. It begins by comparing, and that's what she's mostly doing throughout this chapter. She's comparing like 90s, late 80s girls and teens to today's generation. She talks about how like these girls would be mostly in person. They would be hanging out in like one girl's room, and a lot of the time they would be like on the carpet, on the bed. Female friendships uh, were like, in a sense, like kind of homogenous and very close together. And they would also, if they weren't together in person, they'd be talking on the phone a lot, which is a phenomena that pretty much almost nobody does anymore. Nobody talks on the phone anymore. So basically, there's just a lot of connection and a lot of just physical togetherness. And I don't really know how to describe it myself, but Abigail paints it really well because I mean she lived it, so makes sense, right? And then she compares this to uh, how we like to call it the Zoomer generation, Gen Z, or sometimes called iGen, which makes sense, but I don't like the sound of it. I like Zoomer better. The Zoomers, and a little bit of myself included, we would, text a lot. We would mostly text and then try to figure out what certain texting styles mean. Like if a guy's texting you and then you'd be like, oh, the period means he's so serious or something. But anyway, that's not what she said. I added that in. Like Abigail talks a lot about uh, the iPhone and the Android and smartphones and stuff, and like someone might have a knee-jerk reaction when they see this chapter is she's just being like a boomer right now, even though she's technically not one. She's talking like a boomer. She's trying to invalidate us with our technology, that blah 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 blah, how dare you, blah blah. He's like, no, wait, slow down. She actually has some statistics to back up her claims here. She has statistics to back up her boomer talk, and I'll get into it in a moment. But and I think she's very right for pointing all this out. Like, of course, it's not like 100% accurate because um, the generation of the Zoomers are mostly on the phones, on the phones today. um, uh, there's less face-to-face interaction, and not just with friends, but with like potential love interests or actual love interests. So a lot of their romances and uh, like even like fantasies of like going out on road trips or just something where they're like together with their friends and like doing something, or with their love interest in doing something. Like they can't really do that much. I mean, especially not right now, but considering the weather today, no, the COVID weather, all of that in-person stuff is replaced by phones. And because of that, a lot of these Zoomer girls specifically, because that's what we're talking about, um, will be just at home texting, and then that does not replace face-to-face conversation. And because of that, a lot of these girls face like soul-crushing loneliness, and depression rates have gone up, uh, which I will get more into the statistics in a moment. I hate that word. I can't say it very well. And when you're in person, you tend to experience different things, more things, and you have more stories. And so, cutting that out, it leaves a lot to the imagination in a Zoomer's mind. And because there's just so much imagination, like the imagination has no bounds, so that leaves a lot of confusion in its place. because nothing is really that concrete to, well, young people in general. And so what comes to mind, and I think this is really important to think or to note, is, quote, idle hands are the devil's playground, unquote. Like, these are mostly my thoughts here. With confusion and gaps of experience in someone's life, they tend to seek answers from others. And Abigail does talk about later in the chapter, she talks about how, like, a lot of these girls will go online instead of going to their friends, because their friends don't really have any of these experiences, so they go online. They Google it and they find their answers, which could be also extremely ill-informed women, girls, or even men sometimes. And so then they'll just be gathering all this false information, and they'll think, hey, it's the internet, so it must be right. So because these girls are so young and naive, they can't discern the difference between, like, this is actual truth or this is really bad. And also because they don't check sources. They don't have the mind to check sources and to verify information. And they won't really go to their parents for it, because when it comes to, like, sex especially, they're not going to go to their parents because it's too freaking awkward. And I understand that. I mean, I committed these atrocities myself. Yeah, so anyway, so back to comparisons. What used to be drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, and sexual deviance in previous generations. Sexual deviance, like Abigail notes, and I've also heard of this as well when I was growing up, like a blowjob in the bathroom, in the school bathrooms, would be like, oh my god, oh my goodness. And then for me, I would see, like, teenage pregnancies, even like middle school pregnancies. That's what we did. We were very sexually deviant. But apparently this generation doesn't have that at all. I'll get into it in a moment. So in place of all those things that I mentioned, consumers have iPhones slash Androids, cross-sex hormones, a million genders to choose from, in which they know a lot more about these million genders and a million sexualities more than they understand actual physical acts of, sex. That's also very important to know. And in addition to that, they also have a bunch of pills to choose from, like SSRIs, Xanax, and a bunch of other things that, like, are for anxiety, depression, hyperactivity. I don't know all the crazy words because I was never on drugs. I never took any of these things, and I never had friends who took them, so I guess it must be a Zoomer thing more. I don't know, never mind. All these pills and stuff are sought after because a lot of these girls are staying they're staying mostly indoors. They're not really going out and doing much of anything. And because they're inside and they're not really having face-to-face interactions, your depression goes up. It rises. And a lot of people, not even just, what's the word? Not even confined within this generation, but anybody who lacks social interaction, they'll also just get depressed too, because we need that. So, like, but these girls, even before the COVID, like, this is what they had most of the time. Not all of them, but, because of all these pills, because of all these mental issues that they're going through, and because of all the inactivity, physical inactivity mostly, uh, again, not all of them. A lot of these Zoomers, if you will, uh, I've noticed, like, even myself when I was, like, on Tumblr and stuff, like, the younger Tumblr users would be having on their About Me page, like, their list of mental illnesses, even just really bad habits that they would have. They would just list those. And apparently, according to this book as well, is that when it came to, like, presentations sometimes, a girl would come up and start talking about, like, mental illnesses in her own. So looking at these percentage, or, all this depression on all this, like, mental health stuff, Abigail points out the the suicide rates and even just the contemplating of suicide. Between 2009 and 2017, high schoolers contemplating suicide went up 25%. Teens diagnosed with clinical depression rose 37%, so that's between 2005 and 2014. Depression is experienced in girls 3 times more often than that of boys. And then to really kind of solidify these numbers and showing that there seems to be more of than just a correlation, self-harm supplies more evidence to truth behind Zoomer girls feeling more depressed than millennial girls. 62% increase since 2009 in teenage girls for feeling, depressed. And then among preteen girls aged 10 to 14, like 10, Jesus, a whopping 189% increase of self-harm since 2010, nearly triple that they were only 6 years before. Yeah, like, dang, that's a huge number. And you gotta think, like, what the hell's going on? And then, so, she actually points out something that's, like, seems really like a direct cause of what's, like, why this is happening. She points out that the iPhone was released in 2007, so Steve Jobs effectively ruined everybody's lives. So then she moves on and says, she points out, actually this is a very small point because I can't personally elaborate on it. She points out a lot of these girls have anorexia, and I say that's interesting because a lot of these girls, she doesn't go into it, at least not in this chapter, but when a girl has body dysmorphia, which, if you don't know, it's when a person, anybody, it doesn't matter, boy or girl, man or woman, but they'll like look at themselves and think like, I look too fat, I look too ugly, my shoulders are too broad, my fingers are too weird, they're too long, saying negative things about your body, and this is what you can only see. And I know that that correlates to, it connects to ideal beauty standards. And so that has me moving on to, Abigail talks about like girls on like Instagram, YouTube, mostly Instagram, YouTube, probably sometimes DeviantArt as well, although I didn't really see it when I was on DeviantArt. The girls would like really dress themselves up and look just gorgeous and like impossibly gorgeous. And and then when she was pointing this out, it started making me think about how these beauty standards would inspire a young girl to be like, oh, then I must therefore be trans, So I was starting to think about how, because they're impossible, these girls cannot like figure out the secret. They can't figure out the airbrushing, on Photoshop. So they want to run away from these things. They want to run away from the beauty standards at all. So I've written down here, being trans feels like to them, like they've created their own standard, their own game that they can actually compete within. And this is why it's so extremely important for them to be seen as boys. It validates their self-esteem and self-worth of fitting in and feeling that sense of belonging, like I said in the intro. And take that away, and the only thing that they would have is those beauty standards, which is a false perception because you can be anything. You don't have to go for the beauty standards, but they don't think that. They're always thinking about what their peers are doing, what their beautiful peers are doing. So that's why they get so up in arms whenever it comes to detransitioning, because they want that belonging, they want that community, they want their game, a game that they can actually play. But that's just my theory on it. Abigail talks about the general demographic, to what she can see, what like who these teenage girls are when they're seduced by the trans ideology. They are emotionally immature for their age. 17-year-olds act like they're 14. They are also most likely upper middle class, which is interesting. They are coddled by their parents, avoid risky behavior, and they're also usually very, very, very intelligent with great grades, exhibit high agreeableness, uh, companionability, and an utter lack of rebellion. Oh, and as well as little to no sex life. And those are all very interesting points. That's an interesting demographic. And you can all see here that it's lack of experience, lack of wanting to mature, lack of wanting to grow up, basically. I just recently learned about forced dependency, which is when, in this case, parents, uh, when they like force you to be like extra safe, and they force a curfew. They force you to not uh, like walk out to the store or walk out to meet your friends or something. You have to stay within the bounds where they can take care of you. That's forced dependency. And I think the forced dependency inspires these girls to not do any risk taking. With the forced dependency, I do actually kind of blame a little bit the parents in these situations, unfortunately. Because stuff like this doesn't just like crop out of absolutely nowhere. Then Abigail also points out that these girls almost never, like the vast majority of them, and I've seen it myself, they never really act like boys. And even when they dress up as one, they just don't really look the part. They just, there's so many factors of boyhood that are missing from when they're trying to act like boys. And so this reminded me of on my Tumblr days. Thank God I'm out of those. Uh, a lot of these girls who would have their, um, uh, they would list their pronouns, and every time it was like they, them, or uh, he, him, it would always be very like flowery, very girly, and just very feminine to me, in my opinion. There was nothing ever masculine about it. Nothing simple, I guess one might say. And uh, and then Abigail said in her book, it's like a lot of these girls will get like, if they're gonna get tattoos, they're gonna be like very girly, like maybe of like cute animals, flowers, just something very artsy and like floral in some kind of way. And she says other things, but I don't remember off the top of my head, and I didn't write them down. And then one of the quotes, two quotes that actually were really interesting. Quote, they flee womanhood like a house on fire, their minds fixed on escape, not on any particular destination, unquote. The next quote is, this was from an actual, like, a girl was telling her this. I don't know exactly that I want to be a guy, I just know that I don't want to be a girl, which is very interesting. That is super interesting. And then, now this percentage, this statistic is kind of, I added it in because I think it might be interesting to some people, but for those also reading this book who are uninformed, she says that 12% of these girls have undergone or considered phalloplasty, which is, if you don't know, it's basically just like you're basically making a penis out of your like your arm skin or your thigh skin. It's like a skin graft. I don't know. Someone correct me. I don't know. Graft, and they just make a penis out of your more sensitive skin. And I say this is like an uninformed percentage because a majority of these girls understand that there's a lot of risks in doing this. It goes along with what I was saying in the intro. So, absolutely no history of gender dysphoria, and all these girls that she mentions have no gender dysphoria at all, and all of them are social failures. Some of them, not all of them, are very athletic. Julie in particular is very athletic. She's into dance, and then eventually at some point she's introduced to DeviantArt. And when I was on DeviantArt, I never saw trans stuff. It was only when I was on Tumblr. So when these girls, apparently it is a breeding ground for the trans ideology. So I guess I missed it. I guess I missed it on that front. So, and then as she's going through high school and middle school and all that stuff, uh, and she is more and more introduced to the trans ideology. Her mental health slowly begins to suffer, and then and what introduced her to the trans ideology was it was kind of DeviantArt, but it was mostly her friend Lauren, who came out as trans and also started transitioning, and because Julie was such a social failure, she sees Lauren as a really close friend, and this is very important to her, and she wants to follow in her footsteps because she wants that sense of belonging. I totally get that. I feel it. I've experienced something similar, just not trans. And then setting her story aside, kind of a little bit. Another friend of Julie, she's like doing a class presentation, and she introduces to the class the genderbread person, which I will try to have on here to show you what it looks like. And to me, I strongly dislike the genderbread person because it is extremely inaccurate, and it shows just how little they understand biology. It shows that they believe gender is entirely mental when it isn't, and sex is simply a penis or a vagina or something intersex, which they fail to acknowledge that it's a very, very rare phenomenon, and a lot of the times they never really talk about it. They just kind of note that it exists, and it seems extremely irrelevant from what I can tell from the discussion of trans identity. So it's just kind of like, why did you even add it in? This diagram completely ignores the fact that sex pervades our entire bodies. It is literally written in our DNA, which is all throughout our entire bodies. And within that DNA is our sex chromosomes. So every every square inch of our bodies is has an assignment of our sex. To reduce it down to just genitals is as ridiculous as when the ancient Greeks and Romans thought that the womb moved about freely within a woman's body. Yeah, it's just like, it's uninformed, and clearly you don't know what the hell you're talking about. Clearly the Greeks didn't really know what they were talking about back then. Like, it suggests that like if this is your sex down here, if you were to remove that, it means that let's say for a man, if you remove his penis, then it just suddenly makes him a woman, And then if you were to somehow remove her womb, or somehow remove every innard of her vagina, or just sewed it closed somehow, that would just suddenly make her not a woman anymore. That's what it implies. Yes, the sunlight, man. The genderbread person also goes along with the idea that gender is a social construct, which it absolutely, completely isn't. Gender is based off of sex chromosomes, like I said, and also our hormones. Not to say that when you do cross sex hormones, it completely changes everything. It doesn't. It doesn't alter your DNA at all whatsoever. But I'm just saying it's based off the behavior exhibited by the sex chromosomes as well as the hormones. Gender, as in stereotypes, they're based off of these things, and they're not just made up. I like to grab the little quote, art imitates life, but a lot of these people, when it comes to gender and gender stereotypes, they think of life imitates art. when it came to so that's my rant over. When it came to Julie's mothers, uh, she has lesbian mothers. One of them was criticizing it, saying it. So a woman is someone who identifies as a Barbie doll and wears a bikini and is really catty, huh? Like, that doesn't sound right. She says, biology, not hyper feminized stereotypes, is what makes a person a woman. And I believe on my intro, I showed a picture of what the gender spectrum looks like, or maybe it was the gender dysphoria one, I don't remember. But basically, what it showed was like Barbie doll was over here, and then a G.I. Joe was over here, and that's how they define gender. It's like, that's not how, no, that's not how gender works. Going back into Julie's story a little bit, Julie's therapist makes the crucial and very unprofessional, amoral mistake of suggesting to Julie that she might be transgender, and quickly refers her to cross-sex hormones. And because of her suffering mental health, she eventually cuts contact with her parents. And I just, oof, that makes me concerned, very, very concerned. Abigail rightfully points out that tomboys no longer exist, and there's very little about lesbians in existence now. It's just so weird to say. It's like tomboys aren't even extinct. They're just gone. Lesbians are extinct. They're a very rare species now. It's just so weird to say. We gotta do the thing like what we do with pandas in zoos. No, I don't know. And so then I put a note down like, since gender roles don't exactly apply to gays and lesbians, you can kind of easily imagine how like a young butch lesbian would think that she's a guy, because male gender roles seem to fit in better because she's butch. What's interesting with a lot of these girls, I've noticed that tragedy seems to always strike, um, whatever it might be, like a smaller tragedy to a bigger one. And the bigger ones that I point out are Lucy has her sister with her drug addiction, and then Sally has her older brother who's in a tragic car accident. And because medical people are kind of stupid, they gave him opioids for pain, and so he got addicted to those. And then the doctors were like, you can't have these anymore. You're cut off. Uh, and then, he's addicted, so he goes to heroin instead, and that just, boom, just bulldozes the whole family. And it's interesting. So it seems like I'm hypothesizing that these preoccupied parents who are like emotionally and also materially kind of just like, for lack of a better word, they're kind of like taking it away from these girls, which they need because they're still in their very formative years. So that's interesting. And then this part is interesting. Menstruation starts at 12 years old for girls now, as opposed to 14 a century ago. Breasts begin to develop at 9 to 10 years old, and I found that to be very interesting. And I'm going to explore that just a little bit. And I think the menstruation actually and the breast development leads into kind of a trans ideology in a way, because it goes into also body dysmorphia a little bit. Breast development catches the attention of boys and men alike, which can lead to very, very negative sexual experiences like sexual harassment, sexual assault, and this can lead a young woman to feel like my body just betrayed me. Like, my breasts have betrayed me, that they attracted these people and they did these horrible things to me, so now I want to get rid of it, because all it does is give me trouble. And then in addition to just to getting rid of the breasts, there's also the whole like, if I look like a guy, then therefore I'm going to be more safe. I think it's kind of an illusion to think that guys have it like way safer. Like, guys can still be kidnapped. Young men can still be kidnapped. Also, young boys are very much still targets of pedophiles, male and female alike, and men are also more likely to be mugged, and even though it's not nearly as traumatic as rape, obviously, but like they, like men are still in some ways in danger of something. Like they could be murdered too by somebody. Like that's also obviously very horrible. And but a lot of these girls who think that they're trans don't realize that. They just think, oh, just being a guy is just safer. It's like, you don't even know, honey. You don't know. I was also thinking about how, like, sometimes we'll come across somebody being harassed or beaten up or even, like, maybe almost being raped or actually actively being raped. And let's say, like, a trans man sees this and they don't work out because they don't really realize that that's kind of what a lot of men do. They work out and get strong, and especially when they're not on testosterone, they'll see like maybe another woman is being attacked like this, and they won't really be able to save this person because they just lack the physical strength to do it. And I feel like that would make them feel very inadequate and like traumatized, actually. And so that concerns me as well. And Abigail points out that these trans guys, these girls, they don't buy weight sets, which like solidifies the idea that they just don't really know what like a guy goes through, or on what they think about, what they are pressured into doing and being, or if they just choose to be this way. Like they don't think about that stuff because they don't know what it means to be a man. In closing to this chapter is, teenage girls have it the worst when it comes to insecurities. They are the most impressionable and sensitive to stimuli, and I find it just horrible. Like, it breaks my heart to see that girls would rather, cut up her chest, cut up her genitals in order to just be free of sexual attraction from creepy men and boys, and then also to free herself from the impossible beauty standards made by other conventionally attractive girls among their ages. And then it makes me think, like, why is it that the trans identity seems to be a better solution to one's problems when clearly misogyny for girls is at play? Why should girls have to sacrifice their girlhood just for the sake of fitting in and feeling safe? Why is masculinity the answer when it shouldn't be? Girls should be free to choose, not flee from themselves and hope for the best. Femininity should not be seen as prey, and masculinity seen as a safe space. And I guess speaking as a feminist at this point, this perpetuates the idea that men are saviors, knights in shining armor, and they are superior anyway, so that kind of throws some of feminist work out the window. And I don't like that. Like, why do girls need to be masculine in order to feel like that they have to be safe? Like, why do they have to rely on men even within themselves? It's like it's sad. It makes me sad. And I've gone through it myself. It's horrible. Yeah, so in my description I'm gonna have one of Abigail's sources down below. Her original source is a paid one, but I went on to Psychology Today and found one that basically probably says the same thing. This one elaborates on menstruation in little girls, and it's very interesting because it goes into why is it that girls are menstruating earlier on, and it's very interesting what the person who wrote the article has to say, so I would definitely check that out. And yeah, so later this week I'll get into the next chapter, so I'll catch you then. Bye.